At 6:15 a.m. on Tuesday morning, Captain James Reaper Carter completed his methodical pre-flight inspection of the gleaming Boeing 747-400F freighter at Miami International Airport's Cargo Terminal D. The massive aircraft, registration number N847AC, belonged to Apex Air Cargo and was scheduled for Flight 447 to Bogota, with a return cargo run the same evening. Carter ran his experienced hands along the fuel truck's connection hose, checking for leaks or contamination, then nodded to senior mechanic Emmanuel "Manny" Ortiz, who had been servicing Apex aircraft for over 15 years. The radio in Carter's headset crackled with the familiar voice of ground control. "Apex 447, you're cleared for fuel loading and pre-flight checklist completion, sir." Carter smiled with practiced confidence and climbed the metal stairs into the cockpit, his movements betraying none of the nervous tension coursing through his body. DEA Special Agent Lena Ruiz and her surveillance team, positioned strategically in the terminal observation deck with high-powered telephoto cameras and electronic monitoring equipment, saw nothing unusual about Apex Air Cargo Flight 447, preparing for another routine cargo run to South America. They had no idea that 200 kilograms of pure Colombian cocaine, with a street value exceeding $22 million, were hidden inside the aircraft's auxiliary fuel tank systems, dissolved in a revolutionary chemical solution that made detection by standard law enforcement methods completely impossible. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Captain James Carter had been flying commercial cargo aircraft for 12 years, accumulating over 8,000 flight hours on various Boeing and Airbus models. After completing his distinguished service as an Air Force pilot, where he had earned the call sign Reaper for his precision during combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq, he joined Apex Air Cargo, a mid-sized freight company operating extensive routes throughout Central and South America. The company specialized in transporting medical supplies, industrial equipment, and legitimate pharmaceutical products between the United States and various Latin American countries. Carter's annual salary was $120,000, supplemented by performance bonuses and overtime pay that could bring his total compensation to nearly $150,000 in a good year. For most pilots, this would represent comfortable middle-class living, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover the catastrophic medical expenses accumulating for his 8-year-old daughter, Rebecca's rare congenital heart condition. Rebecca had been born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a complex congenital defect where the left side of the heart is critically underdeveloped. She had already undergone 2 major surgical procedures during her first 3 years of life, with each operation costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, her pediatric cardiologist at Miami Children's Hospital had determined that she needed an experimental heart transplant procedure that would cost $400,000. Not including the extensive post-operative care, immunosuppressive medications, and ongoing monitoring that could easily add another $200,000 to the total medical bill. Carter's health insurance through Apex Air Cargo covered only 60% of the experimental procedure, leaving the family responsible for $240,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. Carter and his wife Lena, a former flight attendant who now worked part-time as a medical office administrator, had already mortgaged their modest house in Coral Gables to the maximum allowable amount, borrowed $50,000 against Carter's 401k retirement fund, and maxed out every credit card they could obtain. They had also sold Elena's car, Carter's vintage Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and most of Elena's jewelry. Despite these desperate measures, they were still $180,000 short of the amount needed for Rebecca's surgery, which was scheduled for the following month. The financial pressure was destroying their marriage and Carter's mental health. Elena cried herself to sleep most nights, overwhelmed by the impossible situation they faced. Carter had developed insomnia and was drinking heavily after each flight, trying to numb the constant anxiety about his daughter's deteriorating condition and their mounting debt. Collection agencies called their house multiple times daily, and several medical creditors had already initiated legal proceedings to garnish Carter's wages. Saturday evening, after completing a particularly stressful cargo run to Guatemala City, Carter was sitting alone at the bar in the airport Marriott Hotel, nursing his 4th bourbon and trying to work up the courage to go home and face Elena's worried questions about their financial situation. The bar was dimly lit and nearly empty, filled mostly with airline crews and airport workers unwinding after long shifts. Carter was staring at his phone, looking at the latest medical bills that had been emailed to him earlier that day when a well-dressed man in his 50s approached his table. The stranger was wearing an expensive Italian suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions. He introduced himself as Miguel Santos, though Carter would later learn that everyone in certain circles knew him by his nickname El Tiburón, the Shark, a reference to his reputation for ruthless business dealings in the shadowy world of international logistics and transportation. "Captain Carter, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Santos said in lightly accented English, sliding into the booth across from him without waiting for permission. "I represent certain business interests that require discreet transportation services for sensitive cargo. Your reputation as a skilled and reliable pilot has come to our attention, and we believe you might be interested in a mutually beneficial business arrangement." Carter immediately suspected what Santos was proposing, but the man's polished appearance and articulate manner suggested this wasn't some crude street-level drug dealer. Santos appeared to be a sophisticated businessman operating at the highest levels of international commerce, albeit in markets that existed outside the boundaries of legal regulation. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Carter replied carefully, trying to maintain the pretense that this was a case of mistaken identity. Santos smiled knowingly and placed a manila envelope on the table between them. "We're prepared to offer $500,000 up front, with an additional $22 million upon successful delivery, for transporting specialized chemical compounds from our processing facilities in Colombia to distribution points in the United States. The cargo would be stored using advanced concealment methods that make detection by law enforcement virtually impossible." Carter's pulse quickened as he processed the numbers. $22.5 million would not only pay for Rebecca's surgery and post-operative care, but would set his family up for life. They could pay off all their debts, buy a larger house in a better neighborhood, establish college funds for Rebecca and any future children, and Carter could potentially retire from flying altogether if he chose. "What kind of chemicals are we talking about?" Carter asked, abandoning any pretense of ignorance about Santos's true business. "Medical precursors and pharmaceutical compounds that require precise temperature control and specialized handling procedures," Santos replied smoothly. "These materials would be stored in your aircraft's auxiliary fuel systems, using a proprietary dissolution method that renders them completely undetectable to standard customs inspection procedures, drug-sniffing dogs, and even advanced chemical analysis equipment." Santos proceeded to explain the technical details with the expertise of someone who had clearly spent considerable time developing this methodology. The Boeing 747-400F freighter had multiple fuel tank compartments distributed throughout its wing structures, including auxiliary tanks that were rarely used on shorter international routes like the Miami-Bogota run that Carter flew regularly. The cocaine would be chemically treated using a process developed by the cartel's team of chemists, allowing it to be dissolved completely in a specialized fuel additive that appeared identical to standard aviation fuel in every measurable way. "The beauty of this transportation method," Santos continued, his eyes gleaming with professional pride, "is that fuel tanks represent the one area of commercial aircraft that customs agents never inspect for contraband. They check cargo holds meticulously, examine passenger compartments, inspect engine housings, even disassemble avionics equipment when they're suspicious. But they never test fuel for anything other than standard aviation specifications like octane rating and contamination levels." Carter thought about Rebecca's rapidly deteriorating condition and the stack of collection notices and legal threats that had been accumulating on his kitchen table. The experimental heart procedure was her only chance for survival, and without the surgery, her doctors had given her less than 6 months to live. "What guarantees do I have that this operation is legitimate and that payment will be made as promised?" Carter asked, trying to maintain some semblance of professional skepticism while his mind raced through the implications of Santos's offer. $500,000 will be wire transferred to your personal bank account tonight, before you leave this hotel," Santos replied confidently. "The remainder will be deposited within 12 hours of successful delivery. Additionally, we provide comprehensive technical support through members of your own ground crew who are already part of our operation." This last statement caught Carter by surprise. Santos was claiming that people Carter worked with regularly at Apex Air Cargo were already involved in drug smuggling operations. The revelation suggested that the cartel's infiltration of legitimate aviation companies was far more extensive than Carter had imagined. Santos revealed that Emmanuel Manny Ortiz, the senior mechanic who had worked on Carter's flights for 3 years and whom Carter considered a close friend, was already part of the smuggling operation. Manny had accumulated gambling debts totaling $50,000 to some very dangerous people connected to illegal sports betting operations in Miami, and he had agreed to modify aircraft fuel systems in exchange for debt forgiveness and a substantial cash payment. Manny will handle all technical modifications to your aircraft, Santos explained. His job is to install the concealment systems and ensure that the fuel chemistry remains undetectable during all phases of the operation. Your job is simply to fly the planned route according to standard procedures and follow the flight plan that will be filed with air traffic control. Sofia Delgado in your cargo coordination department will ensure that all customs documentation and shipping manifests appear completely legitimate. Carter knew Sofia from Apex's international shipping department, where she had worked for 5 years handling customs paperwork and cargo manifests for flights throughout Latin America. She was widely regarded as one of the most competent logistics coordinators in the company, with an encyclopedic knowledge of international trade regulations and customs procedures. If Sofia was involved in creating false documentation, the smuggling operation would appear completely routine to customs officials and would likely pass even detailed scrutiny. How many other people at Apex are part of this operation, Carter asked, beginning to realize that the cartel had spent considerable time and resources infiltrating the company. That information is compartmentalized for security reasons, Santos replied. You only need to know about the people you'll be working with directly. The fewer details you have about the overall operation, the safer everyone involved will be if something goes wrong. Sunday morning, Carter checked his bank account online and found that exactly $500,000 had been deposited overnight by wire transfer from a financial institution in the Cayman Islands that was listed as Meridian Medical Supply International. The transaction appeared completely legitimate and would be virtually impossible for law enforcement to trace back to any criminal organization. Within 2 hours, Carter had transferred $200,000 to Miami Children's Hospital to cover the deposit required for Rebecca's surgery, and he used another $100,000 to pay off their most pressing creditors and medical bills. That afternoon, Carter met with Manny at a private aircraft maintenance hangar located in a remote section of Miami International Airport that was used primarily for charter flights and private aircraft maintenance. The hangar was owned by a shell company that provided Santos's organization with a secure location for modifying aircraft without attracting attention from airport security or federal aviation authorities. Captain, I want you to understand exactly how this operation works, Manny explained, showing Carter detailed engineering diagrams of the Boeing 747-400F's fuel system that had obviously been prepared by aerospace engineers with extensive technical knowledge. Each wing contains 3 primary fuel tanks with a total capacity of 10,000 liters each, plus auxiliary tank systems that are only used on long-haul flights exceeding 8 hours of flight time. For our standard Miami-Bogota route, which takes less than 4 hours each way, we only fill the main tanks to approximately 60% capacity, leaving the auxiliary systems completely empty. Manny had fabricated specialized containers using aerospace-grade materials that would fit precisely inside the auxiliary tank compartments without interfering with the aircraft's fuel systems or weight distribution. These containers were lined with chemical-resistant polymers and designed to hold the cocaine solution without any risk of contamination to the aircraft's fuel systems or detection by standard maintenance procedures. The cocaine solution looks, smells, and tests exactly like standard Jet A1 aviation fuel, Manny continued, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had tested this system extensively. Even if customs officials somehow decide to sample the fuel, which they never do, their laboratory analysis will show completely normal aviation fuel composition. The cocaine molecules are chemically bound to the fuel additives in a way that masks their presence from every detection method currently used by law enforcement agencies. Monday night, Manny and his team of 3 additional mechanics spent 6 hours installing the hidden container systems in both auxiliary fuel tanks. The work required temporarily disabling several electronic monitoring systems to avoid triggering security alerts, and Manny had to forge maintenance log entries to make the work appear to be routine scheduled maintenance. Carter watched nervously from the hangar office as Manny welded new access panels and rerouted fuel lines with the precision of someone who had performed these modifications many times before. "Don't worry, Captain," Manny reassured him during a coffee break. "I've been working on commercial aircraft for 20 years, and I've installed these concealment systems on at least a dozen different planes. This modification is completely safe and will be invisible to any standard inspection procedures used by customs agents or DEA investigators." Tuesday morning at 4 a.m., the cocaine loading operation began under the cover of darkness. Santos's team arrived in unmarked fuel trucks that appeared identical to the standard aviation fuel delivery vehicles used throughout Miami International Airport. The trucks even carried legitimate fuel company logos and identification numbers that would pass casual inspection by airport security personnel. The cocaine solution was pumped directly into the hidden containers through temporary connections that were installed and removed within 20 minutes, leaving no trace of the operation. Sofia handled all the paperwork requirements, creating shipping manifests and customs declarations that listed medical supplies and laboratory equipment as the primary cargo for the flight. According to the official documentation that would be reviewed by customs officials, Flight 447 was transporting vaccines, medical instruments, and pharmaceutical research materials to hospitals and research facilities in Bogota. The paperwork was so meticulously prepared that it would withstand detailed scrutiny by experienced customs investigators. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, Apex Air Cargo Flight 447 departed Miami International Airport, with Carter at the controls and co-pilot Frank Rodriguez handling radio communications and navigation duties. Frank was a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation who had no knowledge of the smuggling operation and believed he was participating in a routine cargo flight. The flight plan called for a refueling stop in Bogota, where they would unload the legitimate medical cargo and take on a return shipment of coffee and textiles, then return to Miami with a brief customs inspection stop in Atlanta before continuing to Houston for final cargo delivery. The flight to Bogota proceeded normally for the first 3 hours. Carter maintained standard altitudes and speeds while monitoring fuel consumption carefully. The hidden cocaine solution added approximately 800 pounds of additional weight to the aircraft. But this was well within normal operating parameters and would not be noticeable to air traffic control or other aircraft monitoring systems. 4 hours into the flight, as they approached Colombian airspace, Carter received an encrypted radio message on a frequency that Santos had provided for emergency communications. "Package secure. Weather conditions favorable. Proceed to Rendezvous Point Alpha for cargo transfer coordination." This communication was not part of the original plan that Santos had outlined during their initial meeting. The message suggested that Santos was instructing Carter to deviate from the filed flight plan for some kind of mid-air transfer of the cocaine to another aircraft. Carter realized that the smuggling operation was significantly more complex than he had been led to believe, and that Santos had deliberately withheld important details about the transportation methodology. At Bogota's El Dorado International Airport, DEA liaison agent Carlos Mendez was conducting routine surveillance of cargo flights arriving from Miami. Mendez had been stationed in Colombia for 3 years as part of a joint task force targeting drug smuggling operations, and he had developed a sophisticated understanding of the methods used by cartels to transport cocaine to the United States. Over the past 6 months, he had noticed unusual patterns in several cargo flights operated by various airlines, including what appeared to be inconsistent fuel consumption reports and suspicious timing of refueling operations. "Run a standard sample analysis on that fuel delivery," Mendez instructed the Colombian airport security team as they watched the fuel truck approach Carter's aircraft. "I want to see a complete chemical breakdown of everything they're putting into that plane." Carter observed the officials approaching with testing equipment and felt his heart rate spike dramatically. He had been assured that the fuel would pass any standard analysis, but he had no way of knowing whether Colombian authorities might be using more sophisticated detection methods than Santos had anticipated. The next few minutes would determine whether the operation succeeded or whether Carter would spend the rest of his life in a Colombian prison. The fuel sample tests conducted by airport security showed completely normal aviation fuel composition. The chemical treatment developed by the cartel's chemists was working exactly as promised, masking the presence of cocaine so effectively that even detailed laboratory analysis revealed nothing suspicious. Carter felt a wave of relief as the testing team completed their procedures and cleared the aircraft for refueling. During the scheduled refueling stop, Manny performed routine maintenance checks that provided cover for secretly transferring half of the cocaine solution to a hidden tank truck operated by Santos's ground team in Bogota. This transfer reduced the risk of detection during the return flight while ensuring that Santos could begin processing part of the cocaine shipment immediately rather than waiting for the aircraft to return to Miami. The operation was conducted with military precision, and the tank truck disappeared into Bogota's industrial district within minutes of completing the transfer. The return flight to Miami launched at 2 p.m. Colombian time. Carter maintained normal radio contact with air traffic control, while Frank monitored weather conditions and managed the aircraft's navigation systems. Neither pilot mentioned the cargo transfer that had occurred during the refueling stop, and Frank remained completely unaware that his aircraft was carrying millions of dollars worth of illegal drugs. But DEA Special Agent Lena Ruiz in Miami had been tracking Flight 447 since its departure that morning as part of a broader investigation into suspected drug smuggling operations involving South American cargo flights. Using sophisticated monitoring equipment, she had noticed that the aircraft's weight readings transmitted by its transponder systems were inconsistent with the declared cargo manifest. The plane appeared to be carrying significantly more weight than could be accounted for by the medical supplies and equipment listed in the official documentation. "Prepare a full inspection team for when they land in Atlanta," Ruiz ordered her surveillance team. "I want drug-sniffing dogs, chemical analysis equipment, and a complete search of that aircraft. Something's definitely not right about this flight." At 30,000 feet over the Gulf of Mexico, Carter received another encrypted radio message from Santos. "Weather conditions have changed. Proceed directly to Houston and avoid Atlanta Customs inspection. New landing instructions will be provided before arrival." Carter knew that he couldn't deviate from the filed flight plan without raising immediate suspicions with air traffic control. Commercial aircraft are required to follow precise routes and landing schedules, and any unexpected changes would trigger automatic investigations by federal aviation authorities. He was trapped between following orders from Santos and maintaining his cover as a legitimate cargo pilot operating according to standard procedures. Frank noticed Carter's increasing tension as they approached the Florida coast. "Everything okay, Captain? You seem worried about something." "Just concerned about weather patterns ahead," Carter lied, trying to keep his voice steady. "There are some thunderstorms developing near Atlanta that might affect our landing schedule." As they entered Atlanta airspace and began their approach to the cargo terminal, Carter could see emergency vehicles and law enforcement personnel positioned strategically around the ramp area where they were scheduled to land. DEA agents with drug-sniffing dogs were clearly visible, along with mobile laboratory equipment that would be used to conduct immediate chemical analysis of any suspicious materials found during the aircraft inspection. Carter made a split-second decision that would determine the outcome of the entire operation. He declared a minor mechanical issue with one of the aircraft's hydraulic systems, a problem that required immediate landing at an alternate airfield for safety reasons. This emergency declaration bought him approximately 20 minutes to consider his options and potentially communicate with Santos about how to handle the law enforcement presence. During the delay caused by the emergency landing declaration, Sofia called Carter's satellite phone using an encrypted communication system. "Captain, there's been a significant change in our operational plans," she said urgently, her voice carrying a level of stress that Carter had never heard before. "Manny and I have been working with a different organization than the one Miguel Santos represents. The cocaine solution was transferred to representatives of Cartel del Norte during the Bogota refueling stop. Santos was never intended to receive the full shipment, and he doesn't have the resources to pay you the promised amount." Carter felt the world spinning around him as he realized the full scope of the deception that had been orchestrated around him. Santos had been working for a smaller regional drug trafficking organization that was being systematically eliminated by the much more powerful and ruthless Cartel del Norte. Manny and Sofia had been recruited weeks earlier to steal the cocaine shipment during the refueling operation in Bogota, delivering it to Cartel del Norte instead of Santos's organization. "Where exactly does this leave me?" Carter asked, trying to maintain his composure while processing the implications of Sofia's revelation. "You're considered expendable by all parties involved," Sofia said bluntly. "Santos's organization will blame you for the loss of their shipment, while Cartel del Norte views you as a potential witness who could identify their operation to law enforcement. Unless you follow our instructions exactly, both you and your family are in immediate danger from multiple criminal organizations. Carter understood that he was now caught in the middle of a war between competing drug cartels, with DEA agents closing in from one direction and no legitimate way to explain his involvement in the smuggling operation. His attempt to save his daughter's life had placed his entire family in mortal danger. The emergency landing at Atlanta's secondary cargo airfield proceeded without incident, but as Carter taxied toward the designated parking area, he could see Manny waiting near a fuel truck with several armed men who were obviously not legitimate airport employees. Their clothing, weapons, and tactical positioning identified them as professional enforcers working for one of the cartels involved in the operation. Sofia emerged from the aircraft's cargo hold carrying a 9mm pistol and accompanied by 2 additional armed men. Her transformation from trusted logistics coordinator to armed criminal was so complete that Carter barely recognized her as the same person he had worked with for years. "The cocaine solution is gone, Captain," Manny announced matter-of-factly as he approached Carter's position near the aircraft. "We successfully transferred it to our processing facility during the Bogota stop. You can either cooperate with our organization moving forward, or you can be eliminated as a security liability that poses too great a risk to our operation." Carter had received extensive training in emergency combat situations during his Air Force service, including specialized instruction in hostage survival and escape techniques. He quickly assessed his tactical situation. DEA agents were approaching from the east side of the airfield. Cartel enforcers controlled the immediate area around his aircraft, and his only advantages were his intimate knowledge of the Boeing 747 systems and his military training in high-stress combat situations. "What specific cooperation are you looking for?" Carter asked, buying time while he formulated an escape plan. "You're going to fly us to our primary distribution facility in Texas," Sofia commanded, her weapon trained on Carter's chest. "After we complete that transportation, you'll be released, but you'll owe Cartel du Norte approximately $22 million for the original cocaine shipment that was lost due to Santos's organizational incompetence." Carter pretended to agree with their demands while surreptitiously activating the aircraft's emergency fuel dump system. Within seconds, 1,200 liters of aviation fuel began pouring onto the tarmac, creating a massive flammable slick that posed an immediate safety hazard to everyone in the area. The fuel spill triggered automatic emergency protocols that required the immediate evacuation of all personnel from the aircraft and surrounding area. In the confusion created by the emergency fuel dump, Carter tackled Sofia and wrestled her pistol away from her. Frank, who had been unaware of the criminal activity but quickly understood that they were in immediate danger, engaged the aircraft's auxiliary power unit to create additional noise and distraction. The APU's jet engine created enough sound to mask Carter's movements and prevent the cartel enforcers from coordinating their response effectively. Carter escaped through the aircraft's cargo bay emergency exit, which opened directly onto the airfield tarmac, away from the area where the enforcers were positioned. He had memorized the layout of Atlanta's airport complex during his years of flying cargo routes, and he knew exactly how to reach the passenger terminal without being detected by the security camera systems that monitored the cargo areas. Using cash that he had hidden in his flight bag for exactly this type of emergency, Carter purchased a commercial airline ticket to Miami under a false identity that he had established years earlier as part of his military training. By the time DEA agents realized that he had escaped from the aircraft, he was already airborne on a Delta Airlines passenger flight, seated in coach class among business travelers and tourists who had no idea they were traveling with a fugitive from a major drug smuggling investigation. The extensive investigation that followed Carter's escape found no trace of cocaine in his aircraft or in the fuel that had been dumped on the Atlanta airfield. The emergency fuel dump had effectively washed away any chemical evidence of the dissolved cocaine, and the specialized containers that Manny had installed were designed to be completely removable without leaving any physical traces of their presence. Manny and Sofia were arrested at the scene, along with 3 cartel enforcers who had been providing security for the operation. However, all of them claimed to be innocent airport employees who had been threatened and coerced by unknown criminals. Without physical evidence of the cocaine or testimony from Carter, federal prosecutors were unable to prove that any drug smuggling had actually occurred. Miguel Santos was never found by law enforcement. According to intelligence sources within the DEA's Colombian operations, he had been eliminated by Cartel du Norte assassins after the cocaine theft became known to his superiors. His body was reportedly dissolved in acid and disposed of in a remote area of the Colombian jungle, ensuring that he could never provide testimony about the smuggling operation or identify other members of his organization. Carter returned to Miami and discovered that his house was under constant surveillance by both DEA agents and cartel enforcers representing multiple criminal organizations. The $300,000 remaining from Santos's initial payment allowed him to relocate his family to a secure location in another state while Rebecca recovered from her successful heart surgery at Miami Children's Hospital. The experimental heart procedure had been completed just hours before Carter's escape from Atlanta, and the surgery had been more successful than her doctors had dared to hope. Rebecca's new heart was functioning perfectly, and her prognosis for a normal, healthy life was excellent. The money that Carter had received from the drug smuggling operation had literally saved his daughter's life. 6 months after the events in Atlanta, Carter was working as a private pilot in Alaska, flying cargo runs for mining companies and oil exploration operations in some of the most remote areas of North America. The work was dangerous and physically demanding, but it provided steady income and complete anonymity from both law enforcement agencies and criminal organizations that might be searching for him. Alaska's vast wilderness offered natural protection from the kind of sophisticated surveillance and tracking methods that would be used by federal investigators or cartel enforcement teams. Carter had established a new identity using documents and techniques he had learned during his military service, and he was living under an assumed name in a small town, where few people asked questions about anyone's past. But Carter understood that his situation was only a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Cartel del Norte considered him responsible for the loss of $22 million worth of cocaine, regardless of the double-cross and theft that had actually caused the drugs to disappear. Drug cartels have institutional memories that span decades, and they possessed extensive resources for tracking down people who owed them money, no matter how well hidden those people might be. Rebecca's heart surgery had been completely successful, and she was attending elementary school in Anchorage with no sign of her previous cardiac condition. Her new heart was growing normally with her body, and her doctors predicted that she would be able to live a completely normal life without any restrictions on her physical activities. Lena had found work as a registered nurse at Anchorage General Hospital, and the family was slowly building a new life under their assumed identities. Carter kept a photograph of Rebecca in his flight jacket as a constant reminder of why he had risked everything to participate in the smuggling operation. Every morning, when he performed pre-flight inspections on small cargo aircraft in the harsh Alaskan wilderness, he thought about the choice he had made and the continuing consequences that choice would have for the rest of his life. The money from Santos was completely gone, spent on medical bills, relocation expenses, and the costs of establishing new identities for his family. His career as a commercial airline pilot was permanently over, at least under his real name, and he would never again be able to work in the legitimate aviation industry. But his daughter was alive and healthy, which had been his only goal when Santos first approached him in that Miami hotel bar. Late at night in their small apartment in Anchorage, Carter sometimes heard the sound of aircraft engines overhead and wondered if they might be searching for him. Both DEA investigative teams and cartel enforcement units had compelling reasons to locate him, and modern surveillance technology made it increasingly difficult for anyone to remain hidden indefinitely. Most days, Carter believed that he had made the only choice available to him under the circumstances. His family was safe, his daughter was healthy, and he had found honest work in a place where few people were curious about anyone's past. But he also knew that the debt to Cartel del Norte would never be forgotten or forgiven, and that someday they might come to collect it in ways that money could not possibly satisfy. Flying small aircraft over the endless expanse of the Alaskan wilderness, Carter often thought about the moment when he decided to activate the emergency fuel dump system at the Atlanta airport. That split-second decision had saved his life and allowed him to escape from the immediate danger, but it had also sealed his fate as a man who could never return to his former existence or live without constantly looking over his shoulder. He had chosen to save his daughter's life by hiding cocaine in jet fuel, and that choice had both accomplished his goal and completely destroyed his previous identity. Every day he lived with the consequences of that decision, knowing that the debt he owed to dangerous people would follow him for the rest of his life, and that someday it might come due in ways he couldn't imagine or prepare for. The Alaskan winters were particularly harsh that year, with temperatures dropping to -40 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks at a time. Carter found himself flying dangerous missions to remote mining camps and oil drilling platforms, transporting essential supplies to workers who were completely cut off from civilization for months at a time. The work was exhausting and perilous, but it provided the perfect cover for a man who needed to remain invisible to sophisticated tracking systems employed by both federal law enforcement and international criminal organizations. During one particularly treacherous flight to a gold mining operation near the Arctic Circle, Carter's aircraft encountered severe turbulence and ice accumulation that forced him to make an emergency landing on a frozen lake. As he waited for rescue teams to reach his location, he had hours alone to contemplate the path that had brought him to this isolated wilderness. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wind across the frozen landscape and the occasional crack of shifting ice beneath his aircraft. Carter pulled out the photograph of Rebecca that he carried everywhere, studying her smiling face in the dim light of the aircraft's emergency beacon. She looked healthy and happy in the picture, taken just weeks after her successful surgery. Her cheeks had color again, and her eyes sparkled with the energy of a child who could finally run and play without the constant fatigue that had marked her early years. The experimental heart procedure had given her a chance at a normal life, but the cost of that chance would follow Carter forever. In the distance, he could hear the sound of approaching snowmobiles carrying the rescue team that would extract him from the frozen lake. Soon he would return to his small apartment in Anchorage, where Lena would be waiting with dinner and stories about Rebecca's day at school. For a few hours, he could pretend they were just a normal family living quiet lives in Alaska, rather than fugitives hiding from a debt that could never be fully repaid. But Carter knew that every phone call, every unexpected visitor, every aircraft flying overhead could signal the end of their temporary safety. Cartel del Norte had resources that spanned continents and connections that reached into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. They were patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless in collecting debts owed to their organization. The $22 million worth of cocaine that had disappeared during his operation represented more than money to them. It was a matter of institutional reputation and power that could not be ignored or forgotten. As the rescue snowmobiles drew closer, Carter carefully folded Rebecca's photograph and returned it to his flight jacket pocket. Tomorrow he would fly another dangerous mission into the wilderness, carrying supplies to people who depended on his skill and courage to survive in one of the world's most unforgiving environments. It was honest work, dangerous work, but it was also the life of a man who could never truly rest, never truly feel safe, and never stop watching the horizon for signs that his past had finally caught up with him. The debt would follow him always, just as the memory of that moment in the Miami hotel bar when he first accepted Santos's offer would haunt him for the rest of his days. He had saved his daughter's life, but in doing so, he had sacrificed his own identity and condemned his family to a lifetime of hiding. It was a choice he would make again without hesitation, but it was also a choice whose consequences would echo through every remaining day of his existence. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.